Good evening, and welcome to this virtual author event with Nalo Hopkinson as part of the Clarion West virtual Summer of Science Fiction and Fantasy reading series, hosted in partnership with the Seattle Public Library and University Bookstore. My name is Misha Stone, she, her, and I am a librarian in the Reader Services Department. Before we begin this event, I would like to acknowledge that Seattle is on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. This event is sponsored by Clarion West Writers Workshop, the Seattle Public Library Foundation, author series sponsor Gary Kunis, and media sponsor the Seattle Times, presented in partnership with University Bookstore. Next, I want to pass it over to Marnie Chua, the executive director of the Clarion West Writers Workshop, so she can tell you a little bit about the workshop and the author. Thank you, Marnie.
Thank you, Misha. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Clarion West Summer of Science Fiction and Fantasy Reading Series. My name is Marnie Chua. I'm a huge speculative fiction fan and the executive director of Clarion West. Our mission is to support emerging and underrepresented voices by providing writers with world-class instruction to empower their creation of wild and amazing worlds. Through conversation and public engagement, we bring those voices to an ever-expanding community. For the first time in our history, that community is entirely online. Please enjoy the reading and stay after for a moderated Q&A. We will take questions from anyone watching. You can enter them directly in the chat box. It's either to the next to or below your YouTube screen. Our Asl Interpreters tonight are Lori Reinhardt and Emily Teal. Our author tonight is the award-winning Nalo Hopkinson, whose writing prompt for this week has caused quite a stir amongst the Write-A-thon participants. I think we can all look forward to some fabulous stories inspired by impossible food. Nalo has taught for Clarion West 4 times and has a resulting cult following from within our alumni base. We look forward to having her back in 2021. Nalo has published 6 novels and numerous short stories. Her first novel, Brown Girl in the Ring, won the Warner Aspect First Novel Contest. She has also received the Campbell and Locus Awards, the World Fantasy Award, and the Sunburst Award for Canadian Literature of the Fantastic. She currently lives in California, where she is a professor of creative writing and a member of a faculty research cluster in science fiction. In 2018, she was awarded EagleCon's Octavia E. Butler Memorial Award. She is the author of The House of Whispers, a new graphic novel in Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe. And she is currently completing Blackheart Man, an alternate history fantasy of the Caribbean. Links to purchasing some of her books are on our website on the event page and in the description of today's live stream. And now over to you, Nalo.
Thank you. Thank you, Marnie. Thank you, everybody, for making this happen. And thank you to you out there whom I cannot see. I'm going to be reading a story called Child Moon that is actually a pandemic story. It was written for a project undertaken by writer Joe Walton and a couple of other people in sort of homage to Boccaccio's Decameron, which was written as a series of novellas by people. That's the conceit. It was all written by Boccaccio, but a series of novellas by people who were sheltering in place in a villa in Italy from the Black Death, which was literally killing people at the time. So here's Child Moon. A noise wakes Amy. She sits up on the sleeping pallet she shares with her husband Doran in their one-room cottage. The baby is in its basket, an arm's length away. It is chuckling to itself. It is holding its blanket between tiny hands and ripping it to shreds with small, sharp teeth. That's what had woken Amy up. The soft chortle, the sound of cloth tearing. Beside Amy, Doran sleeps, oblivious. The baby's been getting worse. Amy has promised Doran to stop her monthly moon-dark pilgrimages to the spring. He offered to accompany her, but the woodwife says it must be the mother alone. Doran doesn't believe in the woodwife's cures and doesn't want Amy going out in the cool of night. Besides, he says, there might be leopards up there in the mountains. But maybe just one last time? Maybe it will work this time. She has to take the baby with her. It's due another feeding soon. If Amy isn't there to give the baby suck, its hungry keening will awaken Doran, and he will see that Amy isn't in the cottage. He will worry. Then he will have to feed the baby himself, and he's already so tired. Amy rises quietly. She wraps the baby in its shredded blanket, then cocoons it in one of her shawls for warmth. Holding her bundled child to her bosom, Amy tiptoes out of the cottage. She has to latch the door from the outside since it has no lock. But she'll be back before sunrise opens Doran's eyes. She picks up the pail and spare that are kept just outside the cottage door. She takes the path towards the mountains. The girls between the rivers don't come down to the valleys. Amy has heard them warbling to each other from hill to hill during her climbs up to the source of the River Elta to fetch a bowl of water to wash her baby's hair. This is Amy's third visit up to the spring. She made the first pilgrimage in the month the baby was born sickly, and one the next month because the baby wasn't better. The woodwife says it must be water collected on nights when there's no light shining on it from the mad-making moon. The rivers Elta, Asl, Jinifa, and Lucasta run between the mountains like the fingers of a hand a child presses into wet sand on a beach. The mounded sand between the fingers are the Grief Mountains, called by some the Goat Mountains. But really there are no goats, though perhaps there were at some point. Perhaps the girls ate them. Once she's well on her way up the mountain and can see the shadow of the sleeping village below her, Amy pauses to pull back a corner of the baby's swaddling. The child is awake and calmly alert. Amy hasn't seen it sleep in the 2 months of its life, not once. It lies quietly in its basket all night, eyes open and looking around. Its eyes are growing bigger. It has taken to biting Amy's breast when she gives it suck. No 2-month-old baby should have teeth. Her baby is beautiful. Chubby with a head full of fat curls of hair and those big bright eyes in its brown face, those tiny milk-colored teeth, like kernels of young corn. Even Doran agrees that it's beautiful, though he's doubtful about its pointed teeth and white hair, markers along with its eyes and its velvety skin of its illness. The rest of the village has been muttering and staying away. Such children aren't born often and usually don't live this long. Amy doesn't care. Whenever she gives suck to her baby, milk with droplets of blood in it from the baby's over-eager teeth, a feeling of serenity comes over her and she knows all is well. She thinks it's the baby doing that somehow, but she doesn't mind. She just wants to make her child normal and healthy so it will live. Amy folds the swaddling snugly around the child again. She clutches it closer against her aching bosom and resumes her climb. She's about halfway up the mountainside. Tonight, snow frosts the tip of the short, sparse mountain grasses. They crunch underfoot. It's been winter in the high, high mountains for a month. The pail hangs by its handle from Amy's wrist, the one beneath the baby's rump. With every step, the pail knocks against the string of wife beads around Amy's waist under her wrapper. Amy hopes the clacking noise will scare away any leopards. Is that a sly rustling in the low, twisted mountain acacias beside the path? Amy stills her feet for an impossibly long handful of heartbeats, listening. Nothing. She starts walking again, a little faster. Rustle. Amy stops. Silence. She tells herself the sound is her when she walks and the hem of her wrapper scrapes against the frost-rimed grass. She keeps climbing the mountain path in a darkness so black it has a nap, like the dense fur of the village's barkless dogs. Amy has gotten to know the way pretty well, but she still thanks Bon Dieu for the faint glow of frost edging everything. The girls between the rivers feed on the moon. They sip from her light, night by night. Night by night, they bleed her. They grow fat and torpid as ticks on a dog. The moon withers away till it dies. The girls between the rivers grow lean and hungry, their eyes avid, their ears keen. They huddle whimpering in their caves in the mountains, praying for the night sky to bless them again. If their prayers are heard, the child moon rises from the moon's ashes a week later. The cycle begins again. From inside the twisted forest comes a dopplering yelp, suddenly cut off. Amy gasps and swings towards the noise. The baby, too, half turns towards the sound. It's cooing, its eyes wide and bright. Its movement sets the pail a swing, knocking the spear out of Amy's grasp. The bulk of the baby in her arms prevents her from seeing where it landed. The rustling through the forest and the panic-footed thud of something fleeing is coming closer. She needs the spear. Amy stoops with her baby. The pail, its handle still trapped around her wrist, clacks painfully against her knees and blindly scrabbles for the spear in the short, spiky brush. Her sudden crouch is what saves them. A creature bursts out of the forest, bleating. Amy and her baby are directly in its path. Amy has a fleeting impression of four spindly legs, long, whitish fur. The creature lurches in surprise at the apparition that is Amy and her baby. It's moving too quickly to detour around them. It barely manages to twist its headlong momentum into a clumsy leap. Amy has her baby on the ground beneath her. She curls her body protectively over it. The claws of one of the creature's back legs score Amy's shoulder, and then it leaps clear of them. It dashes across the path and enters the forest on the other side. Amy's searching hand closes around the shaft of her spear. She is still on her knees when she hears something else coming through the brush. Then it is upon them, a brindled shadow as wide across as the heavy double wooden doors of the house of worship in the village. Intent on hunting the first creature, it doesn't seem to notice Amy and baby. It will brush by them, barely. Parental fierceness and something else half-realized put steel in Amy's thews. Still on one knee over her child, Amy braces the butt end of the spear against the ground. Two-handed, she pulls the tip up to shoulder height. The beast thunders by, so close that Amy can smell the must of its fur. The spear connects, jarring Amy's arms. The beast's momentum nearly drags the spear from her hand, but she holds on. The creature snarls and briefly twists away from the head of the spear, but it keeps galloping forward in the direction of its prey until it, too, disappears into the scrub forest on the other side of the path. Amy sits down hard. She's breathing heavily, tearily. Her whole body is shuddering with reaction. She manages to lift her child, peel back its swaddling. Baby is unharmed. Its eyes are wide and fascinated. They reflect the faint glow of the frost-rimmed grass. The baby slobbers at Amy's fingers, which are wet with the beast's blood. The child is hungry. Amy lets it lick the blood from her fingers a while as she catches her breath a little. Then she pulls down one side of her tunic and puts the baby to her breast. She winces as it bites and latches. It sucks contentedly at her mingled milk and blood. It clutches one of her fingers in its small, trusting fist. Its tiny cheeks work in and out. Amy kisses the top of the baby's head, the tender spot at its crown that smells faintly of sweet lime blossoms. The times when Amy has been too weak and bloodlet to give suck to their unweaned child, Doran has in desperation put the baby to his own breast, let it bite him there, let it suckle his blood. He doesn't mind, he says. This is his child too. Now that the disturbance has passed, the small night animals in the knurled forest commence their wheeting and peeping noises once more. Amy knows she must get going again. She could nurse her baby while walking, but she's drained. Just a bit more rest. Her shoulder stings where the first creature's hoof grazed it. Her head is spinning, so she sits, breathing herself calm. There are spots of the beast's blood on the path, and it comes to Amy what she glimpsed out of the corner of her eye as the first creature fled, why she went to its defense. After it leapt over her and the baby, it landed on two spindly, goatish legs. It kept running that way, upright, like a person. And clinging to the fur of its back was a small, naked child. The memory galvanizes Amy into a crouch, but she needs to hold on to her upright spear in order to lever herself up the rest of the way. The baby seems a lot heavier. Amy doggedly continues on up the path. Her head is swimming. She is panting. Her shoulder throbs, though her arms feel numb. The numbness creeps over her torso. She can't even tell whether the baby is still nibbling at her breast. Her thoughts are asking her whether she shouldn't perhaps go back down the mountain for help. But her sensible mind is far away, no louder than a tickle in her skull. She has to get to the spring. That's why she came up here. She can remember that. Back is complicated. Continuing forwards is simple. There is a tree up ahead just at the edge of the path. Its trunk is perhaps the thickness of her calf, but that's strong enough. Amy takes one wobbly step after another and all but falls against the tree. Her spear falls from nerveless fingers. Is she even holding the baby anymore? She tries to squeeze it more tightly against her chest. It cries, but she will not let it fall. Two small, sharp hands grab her by her upper arms. A pair of huge eyes, their depths glowing, looks into hers. The face is slim, fox-like, hairless but surrounded by long, whitish fur. Amy screams. The face snarls, showing pointed teeth. As Amy's legs give way and she falls, she hears the chuckling of her child. The sound of trickling awakens her. There is water, only a few steps from her face, plinking downwards tunefully over rocks to disappear underground a little farther off. It is the spring that leaps down the mountainside to feed the river Elta. Amy is lying on the chilly ground at the third highest point of the Grief Mountains. She sits up. Her pail and spear lie nearby. Her head is clearer. The feeling has returned to her arms, though her fingers still tingle a little. The wound on her shoulder stings much less than before. Amy pats it, and something flattish, dark, and damp sloughs off onto the ground. She picks it up. It appears to be a poultice, but she doesn't recognize the smell of the herbs of which it is made. The vista out over the valleys takes Amy's breath away with its beauty. Light limns the edge of the mountains. Darkness pools in the vast spaces between. The air is so deep between sky and valley, it's like another country of air. Her village is somewhere down there. Amy sees she had been wrong. Tonight is not the last night of moondark, but the first night of the child moon. It hangs in the night sky, a crescented sliver of silver, throwing a bluish glow over the scene. Maybe any water she draws tonight won't help her baby after all. Her baby! The back of Amy's throat springs water as though she's going to vomit. Part terror that the baby is nowhere in sight. Part shame because it wasn't the first thing she thought of when she returned to consciousness. Heartsick, she checks the spring first. She's terrified of what she might find. But if the baby has fallen or crawled into the water, she can't see it. For panicked heartbeats, Amy wheels and wheels about on the plateau, not knowing what to do. She stills herself, stifles her sobs. She must think. But then she remembers the wide, heavy beast hunting deadly in the darkness, and fear for her child rises up so strongly in her that she chokes on it. She grabs up her spear and starts running, stumbling in the darkness. She tracks back and forth from the stream and away, working her way downwards. Nothing. Someone is coming up the path. Amy has a brief, mad hope that it is Doran, somehow come to her rescue. The apparition is not Doran. It is pale against the dark forest. It walks on two legs, dragging something heavy behind it. It is slightly shorter than she, and it is clutching her baby. Amy runs towards it, yelling and brandishing her spear. She shouts to the creature to leave her child alone, but it doesn't appear frightened. It lets go the thing it is dragging. It stands and waits for her, dandling the baby. Amy bares her teeth. She's ready to bite and slash and rend with them if she must to protect her child. When Amy is close enough, she snatches the baby away. The baby gives a startled wail. Amy inspects it frantically. Has the creature hurt it? It's not her child crying. The sound is coming from behind the creature's head. The creature reaches up and back with small, sharp-fingered hands. It swings something over its head and into its arms. It coos comfortingly at the bundle it holds, its own baby. The creature tenderly licks the baby's tears away, then gives the baby suck on one of its own nipples. It is the same creature that leapt over Amy farther down the mountain. The creature keeps a wary eye on Amy. She stoops and resumes dragging something large and brindled along behind her, the beast that Amy jabbed with her spear. It is very dead. Amy can see her spear gash in its side, red and working like a mouth. The goat-legged woman is dragging the beast by one foot. After a moment's hesitation, Amy catches up. She tosses her spear down onto the beast's shaggy belly. She takes one of the beast's other legs and helps with the pulling. Each paw is the size of Amy's head. She can't hold the whole paw. She has to twist her fist in its fur instead. Stretched out, the thing is nearly as long as Amy and the other woman laid end to end. Its fur swallows light. 2 pairs of tusks cross its upper and lower jaws. Its head has been nearly decapitated. The long, arid head bounces on the ground as they go. A dribble of blood trails from its neck. It wasn't Amy who made that killing blow. The beast is heavy, yet the goat-legged woman pulls it easily. She doesn't need Amy's help. As they clamber up the path, Amy sneaks glances at the other woman. Her face, hands, and feet, like Amy's, are brown and hairless. Her narrow face with its merest suggestion of a muzzle is quite well favored. Amy tries to speak with her, to ask her who or what she is. The woman makes chuffing sounds, but Amy does not understand. They lie the beast down beside the spring. The woman checks Amy's wounded shoulder, muttering her coughing speech the while. It could be an apology. The woman kneels and picks some leaves from beside the spring. She chews them, pats them into another poultice, and places it on Amy's shoulder. As the poultice draws out the remainder of the poison that came from the woman's claws, she hands Amy back her spear, and with one stroke of her clawed fingers, lays the beast open from craw to cradle string. Amy begins to wonder who had been hunting whom back there when she and her child got in the way of the chase. The woman slices out organs, lays them aside. She removes a slab of liver which she rinses in the spring, then tears into rough strips with her claws. She offers one of the strips to Amy's baby. Amy says, "It's too young for meat." But the baby takes the offal with eager paws and starts gnawing messily at it. The woman gives her own child a piece of the liver. It gums it, then tosses it onto the ground and goes back to suckling. Amy unwraps her shawl from around her baby. She spreads the shawl out onto the ground. The 2 women lay their children down upon it. They sit awkwardly, side by side, 2 shunned mothers, soaking their feet in the cool spring water. Amy eats a piece of the liver when offered. It is both fatty and stringy, deliciously unctuous. The babies roll and crawl around, warbling and chuckling at each other. The night is peaceful again. Eventually, the child moon begins dipping into the valley. The sky is lightening from black to deep blue. It is time to go home. Amy stands. She swings the goat woman's baby into her arms to give it to its mother. Her new friend picks up Amy's baby. The 2 women stand there, each holding the other's child. Amy's baby is red-muzzled, red-handed. A string of raw liver dribbles from the corner of its mouth. The goat woman's baby has muddy hands, stubby, blunt fingers, a muddy face, no teeth yet. It has already fallen asleep on Amy's shoulder. Her own child never sleeps. The women's eyes meet. A decision is jointly made. The goat woman accompanies Amy some distance down the mountain to the point where the brindled beast attacked. Then she nuzzles and sniffs her child's neck, licks some mud off its forehead. The child's head lolls a little on Amy's shoulder. It doesn't wake as its first mother says goodbye. Amy touches her baby's arm. For not quite the last time, she strokes the near invisible down that covers her child's skin. Not unusual for a baby to be born with lanugo, but it should have fallen off long since. Amy now understands that the down will remain, will grow long, as will its fingers and toes, that the mild drunkenness that comes from the baby's bite will mature with age into a powerful soporific it will be able to deliver with a single swipe of its hind claws. The goat woman chuffs at Amy, then heads into the forest. Amy continues down the hill. She will tell everyone that the baby was miraculously cured by the spring water. Everyone except Doran. Him she will tell the truth. He will grieve, but she will make him understand. She will take him up the mountain with her sometimes on the first night of the child moon, so the two children can play together. Until her child is old enough to speak, that is, old enough to have memory. They will stop going up the mountain then. She will not put the burden on a child to keep so profound a secret. By then he'll have playmates amongst the children of the village. He'll forget his eldritch friend soon enough. Amy softly hums a lullaby as she strides down the mountain. She's taking her child home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nalo. Just a reminder, if you'd like to purchase some of Nalo's stories, we have included a link from the University Bookstore in the video description and in our event page. Now it's time for the Q&A portion of tonight's event. All of you watching can put your questions in the chat box, just to the side or below on the YouTube video. Our moderator is standing by to get those questions to our speakers. Please be patient, because there is usually a little bit of a pause, but we'll get to you. While we wait for our questions to start to come in, I want to thank all of our sponsors, including the Seattle Public Library, our event partner, the University Bookstore, Amazon Literary Partners, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, King County for Culture, and the many individual donors that support our programs. Thank you. It's already the fourth week of the Summer Write-a-thon, our largest annual fundraiser. Our writers set their own writing goals while recruiting sponsors to make a donation to Clarion West. That sponsorship is really important. It helps us to ensure that we can continue to grow and offer free and low-cost writing workshops online, as well as more classes and workshops that are fully ADA accessible when in person. We are now up to 527 participants in this year's write-a-thon. It's our largest ever. Writers from all over the world have joined us, including Australia, Brazil, Canada, Ecuador, France, Greece, Guyana, India, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Malaysia, and all over the United States, just to name a few. While we're at it, feel free to shout out wherever you're watching from in the YouTube chat. The link to our write-a-thon page is in the video description or at www.clarionwest.org/write-a-thon. And now for some of our questions. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, and it looks like everyone has been memorized by Nalo. So as we're waiting for some questions, we were talking, Jay and I were wondering, we were chatting a little bit while you were reading this, Nalo, and we were wondering a little bit about some of your stories have babies in them, or a little bit creepy, silent babies. And we're just wondering, what is your sense with them around the kind of the horror of it or the tropes around that? Is there a fascination or another element that you're reaching for?
I have no children of my own, so I'm probably a little bit freer to imagine babies any way I want to imagine them. And babies are both beautiful and a little eerie. Their senses don't seem to quite work the way ours do as grown people. They seem to apprehend the world very differently and to have different priorities than we do. And with this story, as I realized I was writing about first a changeling and then like a double changeling, I got to actually mess with that trope a little, because the changeling is supposedly eerie in folklore. But I wanted this baby to be, I wanted both babies to be charming and very much themselves. So the first baby clearly loves his mother, but he's biting and sucking blood from her as he's feeding. He needs what he needs. So yes, I do end up writing about babies and writing about children enough, which surprised me when I first started writing, because I've never had the urge to have children, and all of a sudden I was writing about them. And they will take your plot away quicker than anything else, because babies are fascinating. Babies, dogs, and fire. I think those are the three things that, if you put in a story, you have to be prepared for them to take your story away. I'm quite happy for babies to take my story away.
That's how, yeah, I can agree with all of those things. From Evan Peterson, he's saying, hi, Nalo, I'd love to know some of your favorite things about writing comics, specifically for the Sandman mythos.
So writing for the Sandman this past 2 years was my first, foray to writing comics, so no pressure. It was really hard. Producing a comic a month was really, really hard. And every time I got to be tired, I would think, I'm writing a freaking Sandman comic, and some of the energy would come back. I think the thing I enjoyed most was the collaboration with the artists. And I include everybody from the letterer, the people doing the covers who were different from the person doing the inking, the colorist. I'm a prose writer. I'm used to like black marks on a white background, and I would make those and send them away, and then people would come back. It's amazing, sort of fully realized, moving beings would come back. And that never got old. It never ceased delighting me. The other thing I enjoyed was seeing the artists put their own spin on what I was doing. One of the very first things Dominique Stanton did was to make my imagination bigger. I had imagined the main character, Gazuli, living on a houseboat, and she has a party on the houseboat. And she lives in New Orleans, and the water is outside New Orleans. And when it came back, Domo had made it into a full-on New Orleans riverboat, the kind that you could have a banquet in. And I was like, oh, of course, she's a goddess. Of course, it's a riverboat. So those things were wonderful. And working with people who were just so smart and so talented, the editors, the artists, just everybody.
Have you ever written script before? Is there any, do you find that you had to do more editing for the comic script?
Yeah, I have not written many scripts before. And the first 2 issues of House of Whispers, I had to rewrite each one 8 times before the editors were satisfied, and they were right to not be satisfied. I had to learn, I was putting things in the directions that should go in the dialogue and vice versa. I was changing format from page to page. It took me a while to get the idea of how to handle and how to format the material. So yeah, that was pretty tough. Now I can do it fairly quickly once I know what the story is.
Great.
That part's hard, knowing what the story is.
That's awesome. Nisi Shaw is watching, and she wants to know, what works do you have in progress?
Oh, the perennial Blackheart Man, which I've been finishing for 8 years now. I'm trying to turn it into a novella. It's most of a novel. I have a learning disorder. I have adult attention deficit disorder. I have fibromyalgia. So all of those things can make focus and diligence and finishing a project or starting a project hard, and I can get lost in the middle. So I'm still working on Blackheart Man. I just finished a short comic that I can't talk about yet. I don't even know if the editor's going to take it yet. We'll see. And after Blackheart Man, there's another novel that I have about 50 pages written of that's also Caribbean alternate fantasy history mashup.
Do you have any like processes that you use? I heard from a lot of writers that have trouble focusing or they're doing multiple things at once. Do you have a process that you use?
The one that works the most reliably is open the freaking file. Nothing else has the same kind of, you open it and your curiosity gets going and you want to like fix a comma and next thing you know, you're 4 pages in. But that act of opening it and committing to it can be really, really hard for someone with my brain chemistry. So I've had to learn to talk to my brain and to not see it as my enemy. My brain is lovely. My brain tells me when something is too boring for words. It's not always right, mind you, and I have to have a little chat and say, okay, you're doing all this avoidance because you actually want to do this thing. Yes, yes. So let's get to a point where we can do it. Yes, you can watch some more Supernatural. But opening the file is the best one.
Awesome. Susan Gossman, also on our board, is asking, in your story, does the human baby ever become an adult?
Which one is the human baby? They're both the same species. So I like to think that they both do.
They both grow up.
Yes, because if you remember, I say in the story that such babies aren't born in the village often.
Right. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. She's not bringing home a completely different species. Both she's. They're just. I'm not quite sure what, but they are not as different as they seem.
Right. Right. Oh, I think that the whole changeling concept can be both creepy and fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the changeling myth, the idea is you want to get back your own baby. Well, both women sort of do. And both love their children. In that parting, I tried to show that they're only comfortable doing it because they feel comfortable that their baby is going to a good mother.
Yeah. Yeah, and then caring for each other's children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Joel Donatella Jacob asks, you say that the readers are ghosts looking for blood and the writer's task is to feed them sensations and stimuli to give them bodies in the text. What is your process? Here's another process question. What's your process for this part? And is this a drafting or a revising?
It has become drafting for me, but it also creeps into revising. And it's not so much that they need blood, but they need food. For ghosts, that often is blood. And blood's a really rich metaphor for life, for liquid, for salt, for seasoning, for all of the things that we associate with life and living and ingesting nourishment. My process is hard to describe now that it's become almost automatic. And part of it is I'm not only using that, I'm not only describing sensation in metaphor. So I start from strong metaphors for sensation and movement. So 5 senses and movement. But I use them to describe all parts of the story. So there's a point in Child Moon where the goat woman offers Amy's baby liver, like raw liver. And Amy's like, no, too young for meat. And the baby takes it, and I say with eager paws rather than hands.
Right.
To sort of give you the idea, there's an association you have with that word. So thesauruses are my friends. I look for words that have specific associations that I can plug in rather than the expected word that helps to create the mood or the idea I want, hopefully with the reader barely noticing it. That's part of it. Does that help? I wish I could see you guys.
We'll get some of the responses in chat as well. I'm going to move on to Jeffrey Edwards. Are there favorite images that you like to return to again and again?
I hope not, but but whenever I'm going over short stories of mine, I'll find whole phrases that are repeated, much to my chagrin. So no, I try to mix it up. My favorite thing is to have the writing be so strongly embodied that the reader's nerve endings are firing. That's what gets you going in a story. It's not up here; it's hair and your whole body.
Right. Great. And McKenna Prinsing, Nalo, how are you doing during quarantine? How has your writing routine been affected by it? And has it inspired any new ideas?
I'm doing pretty okay, and thank you for asking. I'm lucky. I mean, I'm not. I would rather not be in the US at this moment, but they're keeping me inside the borders. However, I have a good job. My salary is a good salary. It's not going anywhere. I was able to stock the pantry up. I'm living with somebody I adore in an apartment really too tiny for two very messy artists with ADD. But that and the isolation has been the hardest part. As to writing, the world won't let me stop. So the very first project I got was this Decameron project. The minute I got the email from Joe saying we're going to try and write and publish 100 stories, in homage to the Decameron, I was in. And I've been invited to write short comic here and there, done a piece for an art biennale that's going to be part of the exhibit that had this amazing, lovely science fictional idea that I also can't talk about yet. So part of being a working writer is that the world has not really been willing to let me stop writing. And that's been great because it has kept my imagination going in times when I just wanted to huddle in my bedroom and scream at Twitter. Why haven't our governments been listening to us? We're science fiction writers. And I'm getting out and walking from time to time. It's been weird, but okay. My mom's okay. My brother's okay. They're in Canada. I can't reach them. It's okay. And as for if what you're asking is where do you get the energy or the inspiration to keep writing, I think you get to give yourself a bit of a pass.
Yeah.
Because pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not be overly hard on yourself. I had students while I was teaching who were saying things like, well, I should have gotten over this working from home by now. I'm like, no, pandemic, actual pandemic.
Right.
You get to feel a little crazy. You get to feel a lot crazy. The world is crazy around us. And then the Black Lives Matters protest started, and I was terrified for the protesters.
Yeah.
And then read that it's so far been the biggest civil rights movement the world has seen. Then I started to feel elated, still terrified, but elated.
Right.
It's a lot. We're all dealing with a lot. Cut yourself some slack. If you don't write today or tomorrow or the next week, if you'd rather just go for a walk or watch some thin light on TV, do it. If you can, do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice. Because of a conversation we were having earlier, and it sounds like you're still involved with a lot of cool projects, I just want to, so for everybody that's kind of following, they should follow you maybe now on Instagram so they can know when new projects are coming out. Is that?
Once I figure out how to post anything other than an image on Instagram, I feel really behind I have no idea what Instagram does. I don't get it. I cottoned on to Twitter like that, and Instagram somehow was just throwing me. But yes, you can try that. Or you can, I use Patreon almost like a blog.
Great.
So a lot of what I post on Patreon is public. The patreon.com/Nalo_Hopkinson. And you can go to my posts and see stuff there.
We'll see if our moderators can't hunt it down and post it in the chat as well. Nisi is asking again, Nalo, are you doing a writing jam meeting like Eileen, Kat Rambo? Nisi Shaw is also doing some.
Sort of. I have one morning a week set aside to write with my partner. I have one afternoon a week set aside to write with students in the Science Fiction and Cultures of Science program that where I'm one of the faculty. My friend Emily Polwary, I think Nisi, you know her too. I think she writes every day, so I could at any point just sort of in the morning just get onto her Zoom feed. It's good. It's good, and I would love to hear about more because writing is hard, and I've always found writing hard, and it's especially hard now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are appreciating those. We have a question from Martha, and Martha's last name I'm not going to try to pronounce. I'm so sorry. They're saying, I'm fascinated with the worlds you create. They're different from any others I have encountered. Where do they come from? Your stories are amazing.
Oh, thank you, Martha. They come from the world. I mean, this world. They come from my head. They come from having been reading science fiction fantasy since I could read. So from about age 5, I think. They come from the fact that I grew up in the Caribbean, in Canada. I have a bunch of different cultures to draw on that aren't the usual suspects. And from reading a lot and being inspired by other people's writing. And thank you. I'm glad they're working for you. Sometimes I can't tell when I've written something. I think.
We have a question from Misha Stone, who's on here with us. Are there any stories by other authors you wished you had written? Alternatively, whose work inspires you?
So many I wish I had written. I read anything by N.K. Jemisin, and like one sentence out of every 5, I get to a sentence where I have to like sit down, reread it, taste it all over again. Her writing is gorgeous. Samuel R. Delany, always somebody who's been a touchstone of mine since I first encountered his work in my 20s, I think. There's so many people that if I started naming them, there would be, the list would just go on. I think I've kind of lost the thread of the question.
The other writers that inspired you, I think that's a good place, and we can come back to it as well. We'll get you a long list.
Yes. Yeah.
Evan is asking about the Moonchild. Is there a specific folk culture or folk creature you had in mind? It sounds like a were-goat or something that he's never heard of before.
No, yes and no. When I fly, I get really, I get vertigo. I hate flying. So I take, what do they call it in the US? I take Dramamine, which means I'm flying and stoned, but at least I'm not feeling like I'm falling. And in that mode, I have sort of I'm falling in and out of sleep, and I have semi-hallucinations. And I woke up on the plane with the phrase, "the girls between the mountains." I don't know how I got to goats from there, but goats are fun. And as I wrote more of the story, realized that the changeling would be a fruitful myth to work from. But also I wanted to mix stuff up. So the name Amy actually is one of my Patreon supporters. So I have this thing where people who support me at a certain level, I aim to write a tiny, like 100-word drabble short story with their name in it. And this story came from one of those. But I use a lot of imagery that's African and not. They're up in the mountains. If you're in Africa, the mountains have to be really high before you get to snow, so they're really high. But Amy thanks God, but she says Bon Dieu, who is how you say God in Haiti. So I mixed stuff up. I deliberately wanted it to be hybrid, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, not sticking to any one kind of story too closely. When I realized the goat had like poison hooves, I was like, oh yes, of course she does. She has poison claws.
And it looks like Susan Gossman also has a creature that she likes. She's asking, will the Caribbean monk seals make another appearance in any of your stories?
Who knows? Once I've done it once, I tend not to, or try not to, unless it's, mermaids. Mermaids are everywhere in my stories. They're fascinating, though. One of the things I discovered when I was researching the monk seals for New Moon's Arms is monk seals are nearly died out all over the world, and there's 3 different species of them. They are protected in Hawaii, and in one of the zoos there's monk seal camera. There's a monk seal cam, so you can get on there and watch the monk seals, who pretty much do nothing but lie around and eat fish. But every so often I go and I watch them do that.
That's awesome. Kasmata Lindy is asking, the prompt you provided for this week was intriguing, and they're a bit baffled on how to proceed at first, especially trying the impossible with the myth part. But let's see. But I think I got it sorted out. What made you choose that for a writing prompt?
It had food in it. And I'm kind of fascinated by food and how it varies across cultures. We all, in all our cultures, eat things that when you really sit and think about them, you think, who first got the idea to put that in their mouth? So there are foods that people in cultures that are not ours eat that we think of as impossible. But I'm also fascinated by, if you're writing something science fictional, could you, and of course you could, create foods that nobody would think to eat, that might be familiar, but that nobody would actually think to eat. So that's part of where it came from. And the story that I gave you as an example, Handful of Dal, by Naru Damesundar, does that. NARUDAMESSUNDAR. It's kind of an origin myth that starts from a very possible and delicious food. It starts from dal. So, a bunch of ideas came together. I don't tend to have one idea.
Yeah.
And it seems to be, people are sounding really intrigued by it, so I hope you get something useful from it.
Yeah, I think it's generated a lot of interest and discussion, so that's been fun to watch. But I also personally, reading, I think especially with science fiction, when you see people sitting down and eating for whatever reason, it feels like you learn a lot more about those characters. Yeah.
And it's a place where we can let our imaginations fail us.
Yeah.
It's science fiction, so everybody is eating or it's fantasy and somehow everybody has meat. It's like, well, the world is full of food. Come up with some other stuff.
What else is there?
Yeah.
All right, I have more to go. Let me keep going. Nikita Blair asks, have you ever seen fan fiction of your work pop up anywhere?
No, and I'm kind of terrified. I have seen fan art, and that's always been really sweet. But no, I haven't. Let's just leave it at that. I haven't.
It's really cool. SK is asking, I want to put more of my culture into my writing, but sometimes I wonder if it feels like appropriation at some level. How do you balance drawing from your culture with respect for it?
My first instinct is to say you probably can't appropriate your own culture.
Yeah.
It's yours. Use it. Respectful comes through in, I want to balance respect with artistic license.
Mm.
So I don't always want to be respectful. Sometimes I want to shock, not just for shock value, but because I have something I want to say. It gets easier. And I think the thing that the trick I discovered that helps is I realized that a lot of the things that we worry about with our writing, we're putting the cart before the horse. We're worrying about what's going to happen when it gets published. Well, suppose it never gets published. In the moment you're writing, nobody's seen it but you. So go nuts. Write whatever you want. Your writing is your experimentation.
Cool.
You can always edit it. So try stuff. Try stuff that you're afraid to try. It's just you and whatever mode you're writing in. Nobody has to see it.
That brings up another question that came up in one of the write-a-thon chats earlier this week is about beta readers. Do you find that you use them very often? When do you typically bring them in?
Once I have a first draft. Before that, I will be tearing my hair out, as you can see, trying to make a plot happen. And I do have a few close friends that I will brainstorm when I get stuck on plot. But for the story itself, I wait till I'm done, till I have a first draft. Because then they can see a whole and sort of see where I was going with something. I have with novels gotten stuck, and I have a couple of close friends who will read something that is, a bunch of words I threw on paper, and all of a sudden there's 100,000 of them, and they don't really hold together, and who have been helpful at that process. But I find I feel a little bit self-protective until I actually have a draft.
Great. Stephen Graham King is asking, what one new book or author would you urge them to read?
Uncle Brother by Barbara Lalla, Lalla. It's not that new. I believe it came out in 2011, 2012. She is a Jamaican author. That book is a tour de force. It's amazing. So that would be one. And what's happening now that I teach for a living is that my reading has slowed down. So new books, I'm not getting to until they're old.
Right. I think a lot of instructors fall into that problem.
I didn't think I ever would. It's kind of sad.
And I think that ties nicely into is probably our last question from Trace Yulee. Are there plans for virtual events in the fall with the Speculative Fiction Future Collective? Speculative Future?
We haven't talked about it. If you mean the one that's out of UC San Diego, we haven't talked about it. There was an event that was supposed to happen at UC Irvine just when lockdown happened. So I'm going to guess that the organizers of that might want to do a virtual version of it. It sounded like it was going to be amazing. I think we're all still sort of reeling and figuring out how to do the next thing and the next thing. For me, putting my courses online, we had like 2 weeks notice, was awful. And now I have to do it again for the fall. I have a slightly better handle on it, but it's still going to take some sitting and thinking. So I'm really just going from one thing to the next at this point and planning events. I am awed by people who are already planning events. I can wake up in the morning and do the next thing. That's about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think, okay. And Jay is passing on. There's a lot of applause happening in the chat group, and many thanks from all of the audience.
Thank you.
I want to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us tonight. And if you enjoyed tonight's reading, you won't want to miss next Tuesday, July 21st, also at 6 for our Editors Roundtable. Joining us next week, we have editors Scott Andrews from Beneath Ceaseless Skies magazine, Chinelo Onwalu, the nonfiction editor of Anathema magazine and co-founder of Omanana, and I didn't get the pronunciation on that right, so I hope I've got it, a magazine of African speculative fiction. We have the editor and podcaster Julia Rios joining us, and Wendy Wagner, the managing senior editor of Lightspeed and Nightmare magazines. So you'll want to join us again next week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.